I remember the first time I arrived at the lighthouse. The fog had settled low over the rocky shore, swallowing the world beyond the cliffs in a pale, wavering gray. Every step I took crunched softly on the damp stones, and the salt-heavy air clung to my skin like a whisper. Inside, the light of the lamp swung lazily, casting long shadows that danced along the spiral staircase. Somewhere, a faint humming echoed metal scraping, or perhaps a voice I couldn't quite place. I thought I was alone, but the smell of damp wool and faint perfume suggested otherwise. I told myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but when I reached the top of the tower, I felt eyes, cold, patient, unseen, watching me. That's when I saw it. The air was thick with salt and fog. The lighthouse leaned against the night, abandoned for decades, its white paint peeled like curling pages, cracking in the quiet. I stepped onto the rocky path. Gravel crunched underfoot, sharp against the lull of the waves. A faint lantern flickered above, swaying, though no one should have been there. Each step brought a rustle, not the wind. Something soft, deliberate, something that matched my pace. The door groaned when I pushed it open. Inside smelled of old wood, damp and sour. Shadows pooled in corners, clinging to the spiral staircase. I climbed slowly. The air changed with each step, stale, then sweet, then hollow. Sometimes a soft hum brushed the walls, or was it my own breath echoing back? A shadow flickered across the wall. Quick, almost shy. Whenever I turned fully to see it, it was gone. Gone like smoke, leaving only the chill behind. The stairs twisted endlessly. The lantern above swung in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. I want to call out, but my voice fell heavy, swallowed by the stone. The wind outside carried something strange. A faint rustle, like clothing brushing against old railings. And then silence, so deep it pressed against my ears, thick and sticky. I rested my hand on the railing. The wood was cold, damp with condensation. A heartbeat thumped beneath my palm. Mine or something else. The light at the top breathed, not flickering, not swaying. Breathing, slowly, in, out. I felt it through the soles of my shoes, through the tip of my fingers. I kept climbing. Every step a whisper of timber against stone. A pause between each, like it was waiting for me. For what I didn't know, the shadow returned. It moved along the wall beside me. Taller now, stretching in ways no human could. It didn't follow. It mirrored. It existed only because I did. I reached the spiral summit. The lantern floated in the center, a pale, soft glow. Its light pulsed like a faint heartbeat, slow, deep, insistent. I couldn't look away. The air smelled different here. Metallic, like rust, mixed with the brine of the sea. And something else, faint, like old smoke or memory. I whispered, though I didn't know why. Who's there? No answer came, only the light breathing. A soft draft brushed my cheek. The shadows stretched across the floor, then up the walls, curling, curling, curling. It paused at the threshold, as if unsure whether to enter. The silence between the waves pressed against the glass. I could feel it in my chest, in the pull of the tide beyond. Every wave whispered through the stones. Every heartbeat of the light answered. I wanted to step back, but the staircase had become a spiral of hesitation. Every fiber of my body told me to leave, but curiosity, soft and insistent, held me there. The lantern breathed again, its glow warmer, closer, almost sentient. I imagined it watching me, knowing me, and the shadow beside it, closer now still. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The lighthouse had waited decades for someone to notice, decades to remember. And I was alone with its shadow, alone with the breathing light, alone with the hum of stones and waves and rustling memories. I left without touching the lantern. The spiral watched me descend. Every step echoed behind me, though no one followed. Or perhaps someone always had. Outside, the wind carried a faint sigh. The lighthouse leaned back into fog. And the light, its soft, patient breathing, continued alone, waiting. The cliffs were swallowed in fog. Cold, wet fingers curling around my ankles. The ocean far below murmured, muffled, distant. I could barely see the rocks beneath my feet. their edges slick with spray and moss. The air smelled of salt and something older. Shapes moved through the haze. First, I thought fishermen, lean figures, stooped over, casting lines into gray. But their movements were too deliberate, too still. They didn't belong to any tide I knew. Soft footsteps pressed behind me. Not near, not far. Always there, just out of reach. I turned. Nothing. The fog pressed against my skin. Cold, damp, and alive. It carried whispers I couldn't catch. Words I almost recognized. The shapes shifted. Curled like shadows on the rocks. Crouching, waiting. Eyes hidden, or perhaps absent entirely. I could feel them watching, though I could see nothing clearly. Every step I took left a small imprint in the wet earth. The gravel crunched under my shoes, echoing strangely. Sometimes the echo stretched, as if it had its own weight, and the footsteps behind me matched. Never closer, never further. A breeze brushed past, carrying something bitter, smoke or old seaweed, maybe both. The fog thickened, folding over itself, making the cliffs feel endless. I walked slowly, deliberately, and the shapes drifted with me, always just beyond sight. I felt a pull toward them, not fear, not curiosity. Something quieter, deeper, a need I didn't understand. My hands grazed the rocks. Rough, cold, damp. A faint vibration ran through the stone. The cliffs themselves seemed to hum. The footsteps shifted with the wind. Sometimes they paused. Sometimes they fell behind. And still, they never closed the distance. I stopped on a narrow ledge. The fog made everything pale, shadowless. I could hear the ocean's breath in slow, distant pulses. And beneath it, the hum, steady, patient, waiting. One of the shapes rose. Just a fraction, barely perceptible. It seemed to stretch, long and thin. Not human, or older than any human I had ever known. The fog swirled around me. I could smell wet stone and salt. And something else, musk, decay, the faint memory of fire. I wanted to move, but my feet stayed rooted. Time blurred. Minutes stretched into an hour, maybe more. The sun didn't rise. Only the fog thickened, curling through my hair, brushing my skin. The shapes drifted closer in vision, but never in sound. And then they were gone, not vanished, but as if they had never existed. Only the cold, wet rocks remained. Only the pull of the ocean, distant and steady. I walked again, each step careful, deliberate. The footprints behind me were mine alone. Every soft mark pressed into the mud, like a whispered memory. The fog began to lift, slow, reluctant. Pale light seeped over cliffs, weak, diffused. I could see the horizon. I could see that nothing had followed me, yet the hum remained. Beneath stone, beneath waves, beneath the memory of shapes crouched in the mist, and the feeling that I had not walked these cliffs alone, that the fog had been alive, patient, and waiting. I left the rocks quietly. The footprints faded as the tide reclaimed them. The mist thinned, and still I carried the weight of eyes I never saw. The top of the lighthouse was colder than I remembered. Fog pressed against the glass, clinging like damp cloth. The metal of the railing hummed faintly beneath my fingers. The lamp swung, slowly, almost lazy. A pale light spilled in arcs across the spiral walls. And beneath it, a static hum, soft, persistent, like the heartbeat of the tower itself. I leaned closer. The smell of old oil mixed with salt and damp stone. A whisper curled against my ear. Not wind, not the ocean. Your name. I froze. Soft, drawn out, almost shy. A word that should not have come from anywhere but memory. The whispers multiplied, calling me, pulling fragments of thoughts I didn't own. I could feel them shaping into memories of places I had never been, hands I had never held, voices I had never heard. The lamp's lens shifted. Shadows swirled like liquid, flowing across the glass. Darkness curved and stretched, following the light. Sometimes it seemed to look at me. Other times, it seemed to fold in on itself. I touched the metal. Cool, smooth, vibrating faintly under my palm. The hum pressed closer. The whispers seeped into the edges of my mind. Every word tasted like smoke and salt, like memory folded inside memory. I stepped back. The spiral staircase groaned beneath me. A breath of wind, or something colder, brushed my neck. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. The whispers grew softer, yet heavier. I could feel the weight of them pressing against the walls. Every syllable bent the air around it. Every pause stretched longer than it should. Shadows moved in the lens. Slowly, deliberately, not like reflections, not like tricks of light. Liquid darkness curling, stretching, folding. I imagined it spilling over the railing, over the spiral, over me. I whispered back, though I didn't know why. Who's there? The lamp's hum swallowed my words. The shadows laughed softly, or maybe it was the wind, or maybe the hum itself had learned to speak. I pressed my face closer to the glass. The whisper was clear now, almost intimate, each word a memory of someone else. A morning I had never lived, a hand I had never held, a sadness I could not place. The lamp swung in quiet rhythm. The pale light pulsed with each breath of the tower. The shadows moved inside it, always just beyond reach. They were alive, patient, watching, waiting for something, waiting for nothing. I could feel the lighthouse breathing beneath me. Not the wind, not the sea. Something older, slower. Something that carried the weight of its own hum for decades. I stepped back. The whispers faded, folding into silence. The hum softened, settling into steady pulse. And the shadows, liquid, curling, stilled in the lens. I stayed a while, watching the lamp breathe, listening to the faint echo of voices that were not mine. And I realized I was part of it now, a memory folded into the hum, a shadow stretching in the lens. When I finally left, the tower remained alive. The lamp swung in quiet rhythm, the shadows waiting, and the whispers lingering like smoke, soft and patient. Outside, the fog had thinned slightly. Salt stung my eyes. The ocean hummed beneath the cliffs, and the lighthouse continued its quiet, steady breathing. The cliff edge smelled of salt and iron. Fog hung low, curling around the rocks like smoke. The path was narrow, wet, and quiet. A rusted gate appeared. Hinges groaned softly as it swung open. No wind. No one had touched it, yet it moved. I paused. The metal smelled of rust and old rain. Fingers traced its edge. Rough, sharp, cold, and for a moment, the fog seemed heavier, closer, beyond the gate. The sand was wet, glimmering faintly under the pale light. Footprints appeared. Not mine. No one walked beside me. I stepped forward. Each foot pressed into the sand, leaving its own mark. The footprint behind me, already fading, seemed older than moments could allow. A rhythm formed in the wet earth, subtle and insistent. A hum vibrated through the air. Not loud, not musical, but steady, thrumming against my bones, seeping into the soles of my shoes. It seemed to come from nowhere, and from everywhere at once. I walked slowly. The footprints ahead never led to anyone. They simply ended, folding back into wet sand like memory erased. The cliff wind brushed my cheek. Cold, damp, tasting of salt and stone. I felt it move past something I could not see. A presence hovering just out of sight. Patient, waiting, curious. The fog shifted. Shapes moved in its folds, too vague to define. A shadow stretched along the sand. It mirrored my pace, though the footprints never belonged to it. I breathed slowly. The hum pulsed with each exhale. I could feel the rhythm in my chest, in my ears, in the stones beneath the cliff. The gate swung again, softly, deliberately, and the footprints in the sand glimmered as if wet with their own memory. I wanted to call out, but words stuck in my throat. The presence lingered, close enough to feel, far enough to avoid, and the fog pressed its weight into my shoulders. Time blurred. The path, the sand, the gate, they all seemed endless. And yet I kept walking, drawn forward by curiosity, by the hum, by the silent invitation of something unseen. Eventually, the footprints vanished. The sand flattened as if nothing had ever been there. The hum softened to a breath. and the fog thinned slightly, letting in a pale, uncertain light. I left the gate behind. Its rusted hinges still whispered against the fog. The cliff remained quiet, patient, and alive, and I carried the weight of something unseen, hovering just beyond my vision, curious, waiting. The path to the lighthouse was narrow and damp. Fog wrapped around the rocks and railings. Salt stung my nose. A line of lanterns appeared, old, iron-bound, swinging faintly. Their light flickered as if alive. I took a step. The first lantern blinked. A face flashed, pale, hollow, almost familiar, gone the next moment, leaving only the hum of the fog. I kept walking. The second lantern revealed a hand, long fingers, curling, reaching. The air smelled of metal and smoke, and when I blinked, it was gone. The third lantern flickered again. Two eyes stared at me from inside the light. Not human, not animal. They followed me for a heartbeat before vanishing. I paused. The fog pressed against my jacket, damp and cold. The hum of the ocean mixed with the faint static in the lanterns. Each step forward pulled me into a quiet tension I couldn't name. Another flash. The lantern revealed nothing but shadows on the walls. And then another shadow, folding into the first. A shiver ran down my spine. My breath left me in short, uneven whispers. I walked slower. Each lantern blinked differently, showing fragments of memory I could not place. A hand, a face, an eye. They were fleeting, like smoke curling from a long-dead fire. The path twisted beneath me, rock slick and uneven. The hum in the air thickened, pulsing faintly beneath my feet. Soft footsteps echoed above the distant staircase, though no one should have been there. The final lantern swung gently. Its glow settled on the staircase. Empty, clean lines of stone, no one visible. But the steps, soft, patient, stepping down slowly, deliberately. Above me, I stopped. The lantern flickered once more. Shadows played along the walls, stretching longer than possible. The fog pressed closer, cool and damp. I listened. The hum from the lanterns mingled with something older, something patient, something that knew where I would go next. Each heartbeat echoed through the path, through the stones, through the fog and my chest alike. The footsteps continued above, measured, teasing, unseen. I wanted to call out, but my voice felt heavy, swallowed by the damp air. I could only move forward, lantern to lantern, each blink revealing more and less. The path narrowed. The light from the lanterns pulsed like a slow, steady breath. I could smell damp metal, wet stone, and something faint like old paper or memory. The last blink revealed the staircase empty again, yet the footsteps persisted, above me, never reaching. I left the line of lanterns behind. Their hum faded with distance, soft as a sigh, and the lighthouse remained, patient and alive, watching, waiting in the steps above, still echoing, even as I walked into the fog. The air inside the room was heavy. Damp walls pressed close, peeling paint curling like brittle paper. A faint scent lingered, perfume, delicate and floral, though the place had been abandoned for years. The floorboards moaned under each careful step. Salt clung to the air, a reminder of the sea beyond the cliff. And yet, there was something sweeter, almost warm, trailing behind me. I touched the walls. Cold, wet, rough beneath my fingers. The paint flaked, landing in small, powdery piles at my feet. Every movement stirred the scent of perfume, sharp now, like a whisper brushing my skin. A beam caught my eye. Hidden behind it, tucked in a crack, were letters, old, yellowed, edges curling. I pulled one free. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanting, delicate, precise. Every word felt like it watched me as I read. A presence behind the ink, patient, knowing. I leaned closer. The room seemed smaller. The perfume stronger, pressing into my chest. The salt lingered, sharp at the back of my throat, and mixed with something faint. Dust, age, memory. I read slowly. Each sentence folded into the next. The words spoke of people I did not know, of mornings by the sea, of nights alone with the wind, of things lost long before I arrived. The walls shifted in my vision. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick and slow. The letters trembled slightly in my hands, as if the stories inside were alive, as if they had been waiting for someone to notice. I touched another beam. More letters, stacked neatly, pressed into cracks. I could feel the paper's texture, soft, worn, absorbing every small tremor of my hand. The perfume brushed closer, as if it followed my movements. Silence filled the space between each rustle, and yet it was not empty. Something waited beyond the walls, patient, watching through the letters. The hum of the sea and wind pressed in through broken windows, heavy and steady. A sudden draft moved past. It smelled of salt and something faintly metallic. The letters fluttered in response, and the perfume remained soft, a thread weaving through the damp air. I pressed my face closer to the paper. The handwriting seemed to curl toward me, not just letters, but intention, each word carrying weight, carrying someone's memory. I stepped back. The walls seemed to breathe in rhythm with the hum outside. The letters lay in place, untouched yet aware. The scent lingered, tracing my movements, persistent and patient. I left the room slowly. The boards groaned underfoot, carrying the weight of time. The perfume faded but did not disappear. It lingered in the corners, clinging to the damp walls. Outside, the salt air pressed against my skin. The cliff wind whispered through the lighthouse, carrying the hum with it. And the letters, quiet now yet watching still, waiting. The spiral staircase smelled of damp stone and old iron. Fog crept through the broken windows, brushing my skin with cold fingers. The lighthouse around me was silent, yet alive with weight. I placed a hand on the railing. The metal was slick, rough under my palm. Each step I took echoed sharply, then vanished into silence. Shadows curled along the walls with the light from above, slow, stretching, curling like smoke frozen in midair. They seemed to reach for me as I ascended. A door creaked somewhere above, soft, deliberate. No one stood there, yet the sound lingered in the air like breath held too long. I hesitated. The spiral wound upward endlessly. Each step pulled me forward, quietly insistent. Yet my hands trembled on the railing, small shivers that I could not control. The air smelled faintly of salt and rust. Cold brushed my face, brushing through the spiral like invisible fingers. The hum of the lighthouse pressed in from below, faint but steady. Every step left a soft mark in the memory of the wood. The echoes stretched, then collapsed into silence, and the shadows moved with the light, flowing upward as if alive. I paused mid-step. A draft carried the scent of something else. Perfume, faint, floral, impossible here. The hum seemed to swell. The silence in the gaps of the spiral pressed against my chest. Another step. The railing vibrated faintly under my touch. The echoes repeated, stretched, folded back into themselves. And above me, the door creaked again. Slow, patient, watching. I climbed, step by step, hand over hand. The staircase narrowed in my vision, though the space stayed the same. Shadows twisted in the light, moving against gravity, curling higher than they should. I could feel the pull, not a curiosity, not a fear. Something older, patient, drawing me upward. A breeze stirred from above. Cool, damp, smelling of salt and wet stone. The shadows danced with it, bending toward me. The hum swelled, filling the spiral, pulsing through my chest. I wanted to stop, but my feet moved without choice. Step after step, higher, drawn to the source of the door and the shifting shadows. The echoes became irregular. Some steps repeated, some vanished too quickly. My breath caught in my throat, blending with the hum and silence. Hands trembling, I reached a small landing. The light above pulsed, casting shadows that stretched impossibly long. The door creaked again. Closer now, yet still empty. I could smell rust, salt, perfume, damp wood, all at once. The spiral seemed alive, breathing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Every shadow, every echo, every small vibration of the stairs seemed aware of me. I took one more step. The railing trembled under my fingers. The shadows twisted, curling over the landing, reaching toward the door. The air was heavy, full of expectation, full of patience. I stopped. The door waited. The spiral waited. The hum and the silence and the light all held their breath with me. I didn't move further. I didn't need to. The staircase, the shadows, the door, they were enough. Patient, watching, outside the windows. Fog pressed against the lighthouse, quiet and alive. The staircase seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, echoing steps that were mine and not mine, and the creaking door, waiting above, patient, unseen, and endless. The night pressed against the lighthouse, heavy and damp. Fog curled around the rocks and walls, cold fingers brushing my face. Salt hung in the air, sharp and clean. I stopped at a window. The glass was fogged, streaked with moisture from inside and out, and then a pale face pressed against it. Blink, and it was gone. Just a misted glass, the faint hum of the ocean far below, and a lingering perfume of old stone. I stepped closer, heart slow but insistent. The windows trembled, subtle as if breathing. Not wind, not the waves. The vibration pressed against my chest, soft, alive, patient. I could feel eyes on me, not from outside, not fully, somewhere in the fog or the shadows behind the glass, waiting. The air smelled faintly of salt and something sweeter, damp earth or decay, mingled with faint perfume. I touched the cold glass. It shivered beneath my fingers, sending a chill up my arm. The face returned, faint, fleeting, pressing against the misted window, eyes wide, pale, observing. And before I could lean closer, it vanished again. Silence settled, heavy, patient, pressing through the fog. The lighthouse hung beneath my feet, steady and insistent. I moved along the wall. Each window revealed nothing, then something, shadows shifting, pale outlines in the mist. I felt the presence everywhere, hovering just beyond the fog. The face appeared once more, closer now, though still faint. A breath against the glass. A pause that pressed against my chest. I wanted to leave. The pull to step closer battled the instinct to retreat. The fog wrapped around me, cold, damp, alive. Each blink of the eyes in the glass stretched longer than possible. The lighthouse seemed to lean into me, walls vibrating softly with the hum of distant waves. The fog whispered past my ears. Soft footsteps, or the memory of them, trailing in the mist. I touched the window again. The glass was slick with condensation, cold, unyielding. The face patient, waiting for me to move, to leave, to breathe wrong. And then it vanished, not in a rush. Slowly, curling into the fog. The mist swallowed it as the windows trembled lightly. I stepped back. The salt air pressed against my cheeks. The lighthouse remained quiet, patient, alive. The fog rolled over the rocks, curling toward the cliffs. I could still feel the eyes, waiting, unseen, watching, patiently, quietly, until the night carried them away, or until I did. The cliffs were quiet, though the air felt heavy. Fog rolled in slow folds, clinging to my jacket, chilling my skin. Salt stung my nostrils, sharp and clean. A soft call drifted across the rocks. It was faint, distant, carried on the wind. No source, yet echoed clearly in the hush of the night. I paused. The echo repeated my own voice, small and trembling. Not words I spoke. Exactly. Something shaped like them. Something older, patient, watching. The stones beneath my feet were cold and slick. I moved toward the call, curiosity anchoring me to each step. The fog shifted around me, brushing against my cheeks, alive and waiting. Another call, closer. Each repetition matched my own breath, a rhythm I could not resist, drawing me toward the cliff edge. The wind carried faint scents, salt and wet stone, a trace of rust, the faint memory of perfume. The echoes grew, layering over themselves, folding my voice into the air. I could feel the call pressing against my chest, a weight soft and insistent. Shadows moved in the fog. They curled along the rocks like smoke, stretching toward me. I could not see a source, yet I sensed it everywhere. Watching, patient, waiting. I kept walking. The cliff dropped steeply beside me. The fog thinned only slightly, revealing jagged stone and the black sweep of the sea below. Every step left a soft mark on the wet earth. Each echo returned it to me, folded and altered. The call shifted again. Not words, not language. Something deeper, vibrating through the stones in the air in my chest. Something that resonated with the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I reached a jutting rock. The call pressed closer, folding my voice over itself. I leaned forward, drawn by curiosity I could not name. The wind smelled of salt and decay, sharp in my nose. The echo repeated me, my name, my breath, my small uncertainties. The fog swirled around the edge. The sea whispered beneath, patient and unyielding. The call lingered, waiting, patient. I could see nothing clearly. The edge of the cliff was jagged and steep, yet every instinct urged me forward, though my hands trembled. And still, the echoes pressed, soft and insistent. Time blurred. The call wrapped itself around me, carrying my own voice like a thread through the fog. The rocks hummed faintly beneath my shoes. The wind carried salt and something else, something older, sharper. I stopped at the edge. The echo repeated me once more, then fell silent. The fog pressed close, curling around my ankles. Shadows lingered in the corners of vision, twisting and patient, and I felt the presence there. Somewhere beyond sight, beyond sound. I stepped back slowly. The cliff remained silent. The fog settled over the rocks, and the echoes faded, leaving only the hum of the sea and the weight of something unseen, patient, watching, waiting. I rested on the upper platform. The wind pressed against the lighthouse walls, damp and sharp. Fog drifted through broken panes, brushing my cheeks with cold fingers. Below me, the air shifted. Footsteps traced patterns I did not make. Soft, deliberate, irregular. They paused, moved, repeated. I leaned over the railing. The platform smelled of salt and rust, metal cold beneath my palms. The steps continued, echoing faintly, folding into the hum of the lighthouse. Murmurs drifted on the wind. I could almost understand them. Not words exactly, not language I knew, but a pattern, a rhythm, a hint of intent. I tried to look down. The steps paused. A shadow brushed past the spiral below, dissolving into darkness. Nothing remained, yet the sound persisted. The fog pressed closer, chilled my jacket, brushed through my hair. The murmurs carried weight, brushing against my chest and ears. Something beneath me, patient, waiting, shifting invisibly. I stepped back, hand trembling on the railing. The platform seemed narrower, colder, alive beneath my feet. Each footstep below resonated faintly, though no one was visible. I traced the railing with my fingertips. Rough, pitted, slick with moisture. The hum of the lighthouse mingled with the wind and the steps, layering into a rhythm I could not escape. The shadows and the spirals shifted, a faint, dark smear curling against the stone. I felt the presence press outward, patient, curious. It did not rush. It did not flee. I leaned closer to the steps again. The murmurs grew sharper, pulsing with the vibration of the unseen footsteps. They seemed to form patterns, echoing my own heartbeat, stretching into silence, folding over themselves. A sudden gust pressed through the platform. Salt and wet stone filled my nostrils. The steps shifted, slowed, fell into a pause, and then resumed, irregular, deliberate, just beneath me. I could see nothing. Only shadows, only the play of fog and faint light. The wind carried hints of something else. Perfume, old paper, damp wood. Each scent pressing against the sound of the steps. I stepped back fully, chest height. The platform hummed beneath me, holding its own rhythm. The footsteps continued. The murmurs continued. I closed my eyes briefly. Breath shallow. Heartbeat stretched against silence. The wind moved through the spiral, brushing my skin and ears. The steps below marked a pattern I could not follow. Yet I could not leave the sound behind. Time blurred. I could feel the presence beneath me, patient, aware, waiting. The fog pressed into the corners of the lighthouse. The murmurs hovered on the wind, faint, insistent. I stayed on the upper platform, feet pressed against the cold metal, hands gripping the railing. The footsteps traced patterns I did not make, and the lighthouse remained alive, the hum steady, the wind sharp, the fog curling around me, the presence below patient. watching, waiting. The lighthouse was still, though the air hummed faintly with damp and salt. Fog pressed against the windows, brushing my cheeks with cold fingers. The floor beneath my feet smelled of old wood and rust. An old door moaned somewhere in the interior, slow, deliberate, stretching through the quiet. I hadn't touched it, yet it moved, swinging open with patience and weight. I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and something older, metallic, almost like blood. The hinges groaned again, soft, deliberate, almost sentient. Inside, shadows folded over themselves. Shapes pressed together, twisting, elongating, too human and too strange. They seemed to breathe, curling into corners, receding when I blinked, returning when I dared to look. I swallowed. My own breath sounded loud, heavy in the quiet. Each exhale mingled with the faint hum of the lighthouse. The fog outside pressed against the glass, the wind brushing against my neck. I stepped closer. The floorboards underfoot were cold, damp, slick with age. Shadows moved in rhythm with some slow pulse I could not name. A smell drifted toward me. Old paper, faint perfume, salt rust. It pressed against the back of my throat, tangling with the metallic scent of the hinges. The shapes in the shadows shifted again. A limb, or a branch of something like a limb, stretched toward the doorway, recoiling, folding back into the dark. I held my breath. The silence was heavy, pressing into my chest, broken only by my heartbeat. I could feel the shapes watching, patient, aware. I reached toward the doorframe. Cold, rough, slick with condensation. The shadows recoiled slightly, then returned. Not threatening exactly, but insistent, patient, waiting. The hinges moaned again, long and low. The wind outside picked up, brushing the lighthouse walls with a damp, salty chill. The fog pressed into the corners of the room, curling over the shadows. I stepped fully inside. The floor smelled faintly of rust, earth, and damp stone. The shapes folded closer, curling around each other, forming brief, human-like outlines, then breaking apart again. I stood still. The door trembled softly, as if breathing. The lighthouse hummed faintly beneath me, the wind threading through the cracks. My own breath echoed, slow and deliberate. The shadows twisted again, not moving toward me, not away, just aware, folding over themselves, patient, waiting for something I could not name. I stepped back toward the doorway. Cold pressed against my skin. The fog outside whispered, brushing over the old wood. The shapes inside did not move, not fully, just watched quietly, insistently. I left the doorway. The hinges sighed, closing slowly, deliberately. The room held its own breath. The shadows remained folded, patient, unseen. And the lighthouse hummed softly, alive, waiting. The lighthouse was quiet, though the air carried the weight of years. Fog curled against the walls, damp and cold, brushing my skin with every breath. Salt clung to the wooden floor, sharp and insistent. Footsteps echoed softly. Not mine. They traced a rhythm, deliberate, patient. A name whispered long ago lingered with each step. Curling into the shadows, I noticed a desk, old and worn, pressed against the far wall. Dust layered the surface, thick and dry. On it lay a diary, open as if left waiting for me. The paper smelled faintly of mold and old ink, mixed with the salty air. I leaned closer. The words inside described events I remembered, yet I had never lived them. Memories not mine, brushing against my mind, pressing against my chest. Shadows gathered in the corners, not quite solid, but aware, patient, waiting for recognition. I could feel them folding over themselves, slow and deliberate. The wind pressed through cracks in the windows. It carried faint murmurs, almost like voices, echoes layered over the rhythm of the footsteps. Each inhale, each exhale, synchronized with the long-forgotten name. I touched the diary. The paper was fragile, warm with some unseen memory. Words seemed to hum beneath my fingertips. The shadows stirred, curling closer, patient, pressing silently against the edges of vision. I stepped back. The air felt thicker, heavier. The floorboards groaned faintly under my weight, But the footsteps continued below the hum of the lighthouse. The diary remained open, patient. The corners of the room darkened further. Shadows stretched, folding, pressing without moving. I could feel their gaze, waiting for acknowledgement. The echoes pressed against me, subtle, insistent. I leaned toward the desk again. Words wrapped around my thoughts, forming visions I did not recall. The hum of the lighthouse seemed to pulse in rhythm with the footsteps. The fog outside pressed against the windows, curling toward the shadows. A shiver moved up my spine. The footsteps slowed, then resumed, careful, deliberate. The diary seemed almost to breathe, the pages lifting slightly with the rhythm of the air. I took a hesitant step back. The shadows remained patient, aware. I could smell the salt and ink mingling, sharp and nostalgic. The footsteps echoed faintly, carrying the weight of a name I could not forget. I paused. The lighthouse hummed softly. The fog pressed closer, and the diary waited. The shadows folded tighter, patient, silent. I could feel recognition pressing at the edges of my mind, yet I could not fully reach it. I left the desk, stepping lightly over floorboards. The footsteps continued in rhythm with the name, carrying to the corners of the lighthouse. The shadows lingered, folding slowly over themselves. The diary remained open, patient, waiting, and I stood there alone, breathing in the salt and the damp, feeling the weight of something unseen and hearing the echoes of the keeper calling my name, quiet, insistent, patient. The cliffs were shrouded in fog, heavy and cold. Salt drifted through the air, sharp against my tongue and nose. The lighthouse hummed softly behind me, steady and insistent. A pale beam swept across the rocks. Slow, deliberate, moving with purpose I could not name. It brushed over the cliffs, revealing shapes for a heartbeat, then retreating. Figures appeared in the mist, hunched, crouched, distant. I blinked, and they vanished. The fog swallowed them like smoke. I stepped closer to the edge. The wind pressed against my face, damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and rust. Every instinct whispered that I was being watched. The beam shifted again. The fog trembled in its path. Shapes flickered into existence, pale and indistinct. Eyes, or the suggestion of eyes, glimmered before dissolving. I shivered. The cold pressed into my jacket. The fog brushed over my skin, light as breath. The watchers remained patient, distant, refusing to approach. I leaned over the cliffs, slightly. The stones beneath my hands were slick with dew. The ocean hummed far below, blending with the lighthouse's steady pulse. The fog rolled and twisted, carrying the faint smell of decay and damp earth. Another sweep of light. Figures appeared, closer now, pale and quiet. They moved with the beam, lingering just out of reach. Blink, and they were gone again. I could feel the air press heavier. The cliffs seemed to lean toward me. Every inhalation carried salt, mist, and a faint metallic tang. The watchers waited, patient, silent, unseen but present. The light scanned again. I noticed shapes crouching along jagged rocks. Their forms shifted, bending in ways impossible yet deliberate. Eyes or void stared back, insisting on acknowledgement without approaching. I stepped back. The fog curled around my boots. Every footstep echoed faintly, folded into the hum of the lighthouse and the distant roar of waves. The watchers did not move closer, yet I could feel them, patient, pressing against the edges of the mist. I breathed slowly, deliberately. The pale beam continued to sweep, revealing fleeting glimpses of impossible shapes. The wind carried whispers, almost language, almost memory. Every blink dissolved the vision, leaving only fog and silence. I stood alone on the cliffs. The lighthouse hummed, steady, watching through the fog as much as I did. The watchers remained just beyond reach. Figures, pale and fleeting, folding into the mist, patient and impossible. And the beam swept again, highlighting nothing, yet suggesting everything. I felt the weight of eyes without eyes, presence without movement. I stepped back from the edge. The wind pressed against me, cold and damp. Salt and stone and fog carried the faint hum of the lighthouse and the promise of watchers unseen. I remained alone, observing quietly, patiently, uncertain when the watchers might disappear, or if they ever would. The lighthouse walls pressed close, damp and cold. Fog drifted through the broken windows, brushing my cheeks with wet fingers. Salt and rust clung to the air, sharp and lingering. A room hummed faintly, not loud, not intrusive, just under the skin, vibrating through my chest. The floor beneath my boots seemed to respond, subtle tremors underfoot. I stepped inside. The air smelled of old wood, damp stone, and something faintly metallic. Shadows twisted across the walls, folding and stretching, shapes impossible yet familiar. I pressed my hands to the floor. The hum deepened, pulsing like a heartbeat not my own. Vibrations seeped through my fingers, into my arms, up to my chest. A rhythm older than memory, patient, deliberate. The walls shimmered. Distorted shapes shifted just beyond focus, bending light and shadow into impossible forms. I could feel them watching me, aware and patient. The hum echoed faintly, carrying their presence, pressing against my senses. I knelt slowly. The wood beneath was cold, slick with damp. The hum responded to my touch, throbbing beneath my palms, subtle but insistent. It carried through the air, brushing my ears, my neck, my chest. Shadows twisted closer, curling into themselves, forming shapes too human and too strange. They moved with the pulse of the hum, bending and folding like smoke. The floor trembled faintly beneath my weight, responding with a whisper, a vibration, a heartbeat. I breathed slowly. Each exhale mingled with the hum, merging my rhythm with something older. The air pressed closer, damp and heavy, carrying the scent of salt, rust, and a faint trace of perfume. The walls seemed alive, pulsing with unseen motion, bending space subtly, impossibly. I let my fingertips rest lightly on the floor. The hum deepened, vibrating through the soles of my feet. The shadows shifted again, folding and unfolding, patient and deliberate. I could feel their presence pressing at the edges of perception. The room seemed to breathe with me. Every inhalation expanded the hum. Every exhale echoed against the walls. The fog outside stirred through cracks, brushing against the walls, mixing with the vibration, layering sensations into an uneasy rhythm. I tried to rise. The floor beneath my hands hummed with gentle insistence, like it did not want me to leave. Shadows stretched slightly, forming angles that could not exist, curling toward me, then receding. I stepped back slowly, careful, breathing shallow and deliberate. The hum continued, quiet but insistent. Shadows folded into corners, patient, aware, watching. The air smelled damp and metallic, salt and stone lingering in every breath. I could feel the vibration underfoot, threading through the floor, into my chest, into my thoughts. I stood in the center of the room, alone. The lighthouse hummed softly. The fog drifted to the windows. Shadows bent and folded along the walls. The room was alive with subtle motion, with rhythm, with presence. The hum was patient, steady, unyielding, like a heartbeat older than memory. I left the floor, stepping slowly toward the door. The shadows did not follow, but they remained aware, folding and bending in place. The hum lingered, vibrating through my chest long after I crossed the threshold. The lighthouse walls remained silent. The fog pressed close, and the humming room waited, patient, alive, unseen, and eternal. The lighthouse smelled of salt and old wood, damp creeping through the cracks. Fog drifted in from the cliffs, curling around the corners of every room. The air pressed against my skin, cool and insistent. Shadows clung to corners, dark shapes that avoided light, curling into themselves. I stepped closer, and they stretched, twisting, bending in ways impossible. Then, when I blinked, they vanished. I moved through the room slowly. The floorboards were cold beneath my boots, slick with moisture and age. Every step echoed faintly, folding into the hum of the lighthouse, into the whisper of the fog. Objects shifted quietly behind me, not falling, not clattering, just moving, deliberate, creating a rhythm I could feel. A vase, a chair, a book sliding slightly. The sound pressed against my back, careful, patient, unseen. I leaned into a corner. The shadows recoiled, then stretched again, following some unseen pulse. The walls shimmered faintly, bending light just enough to make them seem alive. I smelled damp wood, faint rust, and a trace of something sweet like perfume. I tried to focus on the shadows. They twisted into shapes I almost recognized. A hand, a face, something human, but not mine. They vanished whenever I looked too long. The rhythm behind me continued. Steps I did not take, objects I did not move. I could feel the pattern of the unseen pressing against me, layering with the hum of the lighthouse and the whisper of the fog. I paused, breathing slow, deliberate. The shadows pressed at the edges of vision, patient, aware. They did not advance, but they did not retreat. A chill brushed my neck. I turned slowly. Nothing, only the rhythm of moving things, quiet, careful, insistent. I stepped closer to the corner again. The shadows responded, curling along the walls, folding and unfolding. The light from the lighthouse bent, stretching their forms further. I could almost hear them breathe. I ran a hand along the wall. Cold, damp, texture with age. The shadows recoiled slightly, twisting back, then press again. The rhythm behind me continued, soft, precise, inescapable. I tried to move through the room. The shadows followed, patient, keeping their distance. I felt their presence in every step, in every breath, pressing, silent. The lighthouse hummed beneath it all, steady, insistent. I stopped in the center of the room. The fog pressed around my ankles. Shadows remained in the corners, folding into themselves, patient, alive. The objects behind me continued their quiet, unnoticed movement, a rhythm I could not see, but could feel pressing against my chest. I exhaled slowly. The room seemed to sigh with me, the shadows folding tighter, the fog curling closer. The unseen rhythm persisted, patient, insistent. I was alone, yet not. Watched, followed, surrounded by shapes that were never fully there. And I stayed, breathing in salt, fog, and damp wood. The shadows waited. The lighthouse hummed. The rhythm continued beneath the floorboards behind my back, and I understood, quietly, that some presences do not approach. They linger, patient, unseen. The lighthouse smelled of damp wood and salt. Fog pressed against the broken windows, curling through the hallways. The floorboards creaked softly under my boots. In a hidden alcove, an old key hung from a rusted nail. Cold metal glinted faintly in the pale light. I reached out, fingers brushing its surface. The key hummed softly in my palm. A vibration pressed through my skin into my bones. I felt the pulse of something old, patient, waiting. I turned it slowly in my hand. A nearby door responded, swinging open without a sound. The room beyond should not have existed. Walls bent subtly, angles impossible. A faint smell of wax and dust lingered in the air. Inside, faces stared. Frozen, pale, eyes wide, watching. Some followed me when I moved, glimmering with unblinking curiosity. The hum of the key threaded through the air, vibrating against the walls, through the floor. I stepped closer. The air pressed damp and cool against my cheeks. Shadows pulled along the corners, folding and curling, alive yet distant. The key throbbed faintly in my hand, syncing with my pulse, but not entirely mine. Another door appeared. I had not seen it before. I turned the key again. It opened with a slow whisper, revealing a room bathed in pale, flickering light. Figures were still, their eyes following, patient, observing. I moved between the rooms, each one impossible, bending space, walls narrowing and widening subtly. The key hummed, urging me onward. I felt the vibration in my chest, under my hands, through the soles of my boots. Some faces seemed familiar, though I could not place them. Eyes locked with mine for a heartbeat, then dissolved into shadows. The smell of damp wood and old paper grew stronger. The air shimmered faintly, bending light, carrying a trace of salt and iron. I paused in the center of a room. The hum pulsed stronger, a heartbeat that was both mine and not mine. Shadows crept at the edges, folding, patient, observing. Every door I opened revealed a fragment of something impossible. I held the key tighter. Its vibration pressed in my palm, whispering secrets I could not name. The faces in the rooms remained, frozen yet aware, watching patiently. I felt a rhythm beneath the floors, soft, insistent, like footsteps that should not exist. I stepped back toward the alcove. The key thrummed with subtle insistence. The fog pressed closer, curling under the door frames, carrying the scent of damp stone and salt. Shadows remained in the corners, patient, folding, bending. I let the key hang by my side. The doors remained open, revealing impossible spaces and watching eyes. The humming lingered, subtle, vibrating through the air, the floor, and my chest. I breathed slowly, inhaling salt, damp wood, and something faintly metallic. I stood alone, aware of the key, aware of the rooms, aware of the faces I could not leave. The lighthouse hummed softly. The fog pressed in. Shadows folded quietly into corners. The key throbbed faintly in my hand, patient and insistent. And I realized the doors might always remain, the watchers might always observe, and the hum would always follow, quiet, subtle, and eternal. The lighthouse smelled of damp wood and salt, chilled despite the summer sun outside. Fog drifted low along the cliffs, brushing against broken panes, carrying the faint tang of iron. Every step I took echoed softly, swallowed by silence. Windows frosted over. Not from cold outside, they were warm, but frost spread like veins across a glass. I pressed my palm against one pane. The ice shivered beneath my touch, cold and alive. Shapes pressed against the frosted windows. I could not tell if they were trying to break in or break out. Human? Not quite. They moved slowly, deliberate, their forms twisting against the ice. The wind carried whispers, soft, indistinct words, repeating something I almost remembered. A name? A warning? Each echo curled through the room, brushing my ears, settling along my spine. I leaned closer. My breath fogged the glass, mixing with the frost. The shapes twisted, stretched, moving in ways the mind should not perceive. Eyes, or the suggestion of eyes, glimmered faintly through the ice. I stepped back, heart quiet, pulse steadying. The floorboards beneath my boots creaked softly, damp with condensation. The wind pressed against the walls, carrying the subtle scent of salt, frost, and something metallic. The whispers drifted with it, repeating, patient, insistent. I traced the frost with a fingertip. It was cold, slick, almost sticky like frozen breath. The shapes shifted in response, moving closer, bending toward me, then vanishing with a blink. I could feel them pressing, patient, watching, waiting. I moved down the hall. The frost spread from window to window, covering every pane in icy veins. Light bent subtly through it, pale and fragmented. The fog outside pressed against the glass, curling like fingers. The whispers followed. Words I almost remembered, fragment of thoughts that were mine, yet not mine. I tried to listen, but meaning slipped through the gaps between the echoes. A name, a warning, or nothing at all, uncertain and deliberate. I stopped at the corner. Shadows pulled along the walls, merging with the frost, bending light, stretching subtly. The air smelled damp and metallic, tinged with salt. The wind sighed faintly, carrying the whispers along the floorboards, through the cracks, into my chest. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass. The shapes pressed back, following my motion, melting and reforming in impossible ways. The frost shimmered faintly, bending light, making the forms alive, patient, aware. I could feel the rhythm of the wind and whispers underfoot. It was not wind alone, nor the creak of the floor. It was presence quiet, pressing, subtle. I inhaled slowly, tasting salt and frost, damp stone and wood, the intangible chill lingering in my chest. I took a step back. The frost remained, white veins across every pane. The shapes retreated slightly, then paused patient. The whispers continued, repeating what I could not fully recall, curling around my mind. I moved toward the door. The frost did not stop me, but the shapes followed, shifting in the ice, patient, silent. The wind pressed against my back, carrying echoes that were mine and not mine, repeating and fading. I paused in the hall. The windows trembled slightly, as if breathing. Shadows and frost pressed close to the edges of vision. The whispers lingered in the corners, a rhythm I could feel, but not fully hear. And I understood. Some presences do not leave. They press, patient and quiet, through frost and wind, shadows and glass. and I would leave the hall, but the whispers, the frost, the shapes in the windows would remain. The lighthouse smelled of damp wood and salt. Fog pressed against broken windows, curling through the hallways. I could feel the chill clinging to the floorboards beneath my boots. The hall creaked, softly at first, then a rustle, low and deliberate, moving somewhere just out of sight. I paused. The air was thick with stillness, yet I could sense movement, something shifting, patient. A door slammed somewhere far away. The sound echoed, bouncing against walls, curling into corners I could not see. My footsteps moved forward. Each step echoed strangely, unevenly, as if the hall had a memory of its own. Then I realized another pair of footsteps followed, perfect in sync with mine. I slowed. The rhythm did too. Shadows clung to the edges of the walls. They bent and twisted with the pale light, stretching toward me, withdrawing when I tried to focus. The rustling followed, weaving around corners, soft and deliberate. I could smell damp wood, cold stone, and faintly something metallic, like iron or old rust. I turned a corner. The hall seemed to extend farther than it should. A faint draft whispered past my ears, carrying the scent of salt and something else I could not name. The footsteps behind me continued, patient, echoing, yet unseen. A loose floorboard shivered beneath my weight. The rustling grew louder, more insistent, a whisper of movement brushing along walls and ceilings. I pressed my palm against the cold stone, steadying myself. The vibration of the hall seemed to hum faintly through my arm. I moved slowly. Every creak, every breath of wind seemed magnified. The footsteps behind me remained perfect, matching my rhythm. I could not hear a source. I could not see a source. A door slammed again. The sound reverberated, swallowed by shadows, curling back toward me. The hall seemed alive, bending and stretching, folding around unseen watchers. I felt their presence in the corners of my vision, patient, waiting, quiet. I paused mid-step. Silence pressed in. The rustling continued, soft, deliberate, brushing at my ankles along the walls. The echo of my own heartbeat mingled with it, uncertain where I ended and the hall began. I leaned against the wall. Cold stone pressed to my cheek, grounding me, but the rhythm of another following remained. I breathed slowly, inhaling damp wood, salt, and the metallic tang in the air. Shadows shifted, moving in the corners, avoiding the pale light. I started again. Each step echoed. Each creak harmonized with something unseen. The rustling seemed to follow, retreat, then return, patient, inevitable. The doorways stretched, halls curved impossibly. I stopped at the center. Footsteps behind me, matching mine, rustling in every corner. Shadows folding, stretching, whispering their presence without sound. The hall breathed with me, around me, beneath me. I realized I was not alone, not in body, but in rhythm, in echo, in presence. The lighthouse walls held more than stone and wood. They held memory, patience, quiet observation. I moved again, each step deliberate. The hall rustled, responded, a quiet, rising tension. The footsteps behind me stayed in perfect sync. And I understood, even when alone, the hall would never let me be. The lighthouse smelled faintly of salt and old wood. Fog pressed against the windows, thick and cold. I could feel the dampness settling into my sleeves, the chill rising to the floorboards. A lantern rested on a table. It swung slowly back and forth, though no breeze moved through the room. Its pale light wavered against peeling walls, stretching shadows into corners. I stepped closer. The air hummed faintly, vibrating through my chest. The light fell on the walls, and I saw the writing, words etched in haste or in warning. Plea, invitation, threat. Each line seemed alive, curling toward me in silence. I leaned closer. The words shifted subtly, as if responding to my gaze. My breath caught in my chest. The lantern swayed again, casting fractured patterns of light and shadow. The walls whispered to me without sound. I could almost hear the words grow louder in the silence, pressing into my thoughts. I reached out. The air was cold, metallic against my fingertips. The lantern hummed softly, vibrating in rhythm with my pulse. Each flicker revealed more writing. Names, dates, fragments of sentences I did not understand, but felt intimately. The room felt alive. Walls seemed to bend slightly, stretching and breathing around me. I felt eyes on me, countless, patient, unseen. The words invited me closer, and I could not resist. The lantern swung faster. Shadows twisted along the walls, reaching for me. The writing changed again. Warnings became questions. Questions became accusations. I stepped back. The table groaned under the weight of the lamp. I could feel the vibration through the floor, through my boots. The air tasted of rust and old smoke, faint and suffocating. I circled the room slowly. Every angle revealed more letters, more eyes, more intent. The whispers were not audible, yet they filled my mind. Each phrase directed at me, growing heavier with every heartbeat. The lantern paused mid-swing, then trembled violently. I flinched, and the words seemed to pulse with a quiet energy. The shadows in the corners clung to walls, folding, stretching, disappearing when I looked directly. I realized the room was waiting for recognition, for understanding, or for something I could not name. I knelt by the table. The lantern's hum resonated against my palms. The writing glowed faintly in the pale light, almost breathing. I traced one word with a trembling finger. It burned faintly against my skin. Silence enveloped me. Then the lantern swung again, slower this time, deliberate, like a pendulum counting time I could not measure. The air was thick with anticipation, thick with the metallic tang of something old and patient. I breathed in, tasting the dust and damp wood, feeling it settle in my lungs. I could not look away. The words seemed to pull me forward. Faces appeared and vanished in the flickers of light. Pleading, watching, warning. I understood only one thing. The lantern, the writing, the room itself, they were alive with memory, with intent. I stepped back, my boots whispering against the floor. The lantern swung once more, slower, as if marking the passage of my hesitation. The words seemed to sigh, folding back into walls, but their presence lingered. I could feel it pressing against my mind, patient and insistent. I left the table. The room exhaled a faint, shivering hum. The lantern continued its gentle swing, unbothered, eternal. The writing faded in the corners of my vision, but the memory of it pressed against my chest. I walked away slowly. Each step echoed in the silent room. The lantern watched me go, swinging, humming, waiting. And I knew the words would remain, lingering, patient, until someone else came close enough to listen. The night air smelled of salt and wet stone. Fog curled around the base of the lighthouse, thick and slow, swallowing the world outside. I could feel the chill pressing into my skin, damp and insistent. The tide was moving faster than it should. Waves licked at the lighthouse foundation, climbing, pressing closer. Each crest of water cast shadows that twisted along the walls, stretching, shrinking, alive. I stepped toward the edge, boots sinking slightly into the wet sand. The wind carried a low hum, rhythmic, like something breathing beneath the waves. Figures emerged, pale and still, eyes glinting faintly where the moon touched the water. I could not tell if they moved or if the tide moved them. Their presence was patient, watching, waiting just beyond reach. Every heartbeat echoed against the hollow stone, loud in the quiet. The water rose higher. Shadows stretched up the walls of the lighthouse, wrapping around corners and columns. I could feel the dampness in my hair, the salt in the air, the pull of something unseen beneath the surface. I took a cautious step closer. The figures seemed to tilt their heads, observing. Not a word passed, but the air pressed against my skin like a whisper. A static hum ran through the stone, vibrating in my chest. Waves surged suddenly, spilling higher. Figures appeared between the ripples, then vanished as the water receded. Each flash of their pale shapes left an impression in my mind, like fingerprints pressed on memory. I shivered, tasting salt on my lips, feeling the spray cling to my clothes. The lighthouse walls groaned faintly as the tide struck them. Shadows writhed, curling into shapes I could almost understand, but dared not. I leaned closer to the water's edge. The tide pulled at the sand, at the stones beneath my boots. Figures surfaced briefly, pale and silent, eyes like lanterns, watching, waiting. Something in me wanted to step forward, to reach into the water, but I could not. The hum grew, faintly echoing the rhythm of the waves. Wind tugged at the lighthouse doors, at the railings, at my jacket. The figures lingered at the threshold of perception, patient and still. I realized they were not fleeing. They would not leave. I stepped back. Water splashed around the base of the lighthouse, carrying whispers I almost understood. The tide seemed aware of me, following, pressing closer with each heartbeat. Shadows twisted with the waves, curling up the walls, spilling across the floorboards in faint light. I could see them now, half in fog, half in shadow, watching, waiting, silent but full of intent. The tide came higher still, brushing my ankles, then my knees. Salt stung my skin, cold against my legs, anchoring me to the moment. I turned from the edge, boots sloshing in the rising water. The lighthouse hummed faintly, the vibrations echoing through the stone floors and my chest. The figures remained at the boundary of sight, patient, immovable. I sensed they would follow, not in steps, but in presence, in attention, in silence. I drew back toward the door, tracing the damp floorboards with trembling hands. The tide receded slightly, then surged again, impatient. Each wave brought new shapes to the surface, new shadows that pressed against the world, impossible and waiting. I paused, listening. The hum, the whisper, the weight of the tide pressing against the walls. The figures lingered, eyes glinting faintly, patient, quiet, eternal. And I realized I was not alone. Though no one had touched me, no one had spoken, I had been watched all along. I stepped inside, feeling the cold damp recede slightly under the heavy stone of the lighthouse. The tide licked at the threshold, restless, insistent, and the shadows followed, curling and stretching along the walls. I breathed slowly, tasting salt and iron, feeling the pulse of water and stone beneath my hands. Outside, the tide continued its rise, patient, inevitable, carrying with it watchers I could not name. And I understood. This place, the lighthouse, the tide, the figures, they were all waiting, always waiting. Fog pressed against the cliffs, heavy and damp. The night smelled of wet stone and distant sea. I stood alone, boots sinking slightly into the cold, uneven ground. Soft whispers drifted across the rocks. They carried a familiarity I could not place. Memory and dream tangled together, indistinguishable. I leaned closer to the edge. The wind tugged at my hair and clothes, carrying the whispers closer. They seemed to respond to my breath, to the shift of my weight. Figures stirred just beyond the fog. I could not see them clearly, only the pale glint of eyes reflected in scattered moonlight. They waited patiently, unmoving. Yet their presence pressed against me like the weight of water. The whispers grew faintly urgent, almost pleading. Each word brushed my skin like a touch I remembered but could not name. I swallowed, tasting salt and fear. I took a step forward. The cliff trembled under the wind and the steady pulse of the tide below. The whispers shifted, circling, layering with my heartbeat. Something moved closer. Not fast, not loud. Patient, inevitable. I felt its attention before I saw it, pressing against the edges of thought. I shivered, pressing my hands into my coat pockets. Cold seeped into the fabric, biting at my fingers. The air was thick with damp stone and the distant hum of unseen waves. A shadow shifted beyond the fog. It was neither large nor small, but it filled space with presence. I felt my chest tighten, every breath shallow. The whispers grew softer, folding over themselves. A name almost reached me, familiar, distant, broken. I felt it tug at memory and dream alike, pulling me closer to the edge. I dared not look down. The cliffs dropped into black water, restless and humming beneath. Figures lingered there, half visible, their eyes glinting, patient and watchful. I stepped back, boots scraping stone. The fog wrapped around me, damp and suffocating. Whispers circled again, soft, endless, like a tide I could not escape. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the voices found their way through. They blended with the wind, the salt, the steady pulse of the night. The presence remained closer, inevitable, brushing against the edge of thought. I sensed its patience, the slow stretching of its attention across the rocks. I realized it had been here long before me, waiting, observing, folding the cliffs and the fog into itself. I inhaled sharply, tasting iron and salt. The whispers seemed to respond, twisting around my name, without saying it clearly. I wanted to step back, to leave, yet something in me leaned closer, drawn into the rhythm of the cliffs. A soft rustling came from the fog, almost beneath my feet. It mirrored my movement, silent and precise. The presence shifted with it, patient, inevitable, brushing against my mind. I exhaled slowly, letting the cold seep into my lungs. The whispers faded slightly, leaving the hum of wind and tide. Figures lingered at the edges of fog and rock, silent, waiting. I turned from the cliff's edge, boots crunching softly on stone. The fog clung to my coat and hair, damp and persistent. The whispers retreated just enough to allow thought, but never fully. And I understood, without seeing, without touch, without words. The cliffs, the fog, the whispers, they belonged together. I was merely passing through, observed, measured, felt. I stepped back toward the lighthouse, salt on my lips, cold in my bones. The night held its quiet tension, the whispers retreating but never gone. Beyond the cliffs, the presence remained, patient, inevitable, watching. The hallway smelled of damp wood and rust. I paused outside the door. A lock, stubborn and cold, sealed the room inside. From beyond it, faint sounds drifted, a hum, low and vibrating through the floor. Then voices. They sang together in distorted harmony, soft yet insistent, twisting my name in quiet arcs. I pressed closer, ears leaning toward the keyhole. The air thickened around me. It pressed against my chest, subtle and heavy, like fog settling indoors. Breath became slow, careful, tasting salt and dust. The door groaned. Not my touch, not by wind, only its own weight shifting subtly. A shadow curled at its edges, folding into the frame. The voices rose, faintly laughing, singing in a tone both sweet and wrong. I felt them vibrate through my bones. Each note carried something familiar, yet unreachable. I pressed my face closer. The keyhole framed darkness that pulsed as if alive. Expectancy hung in the air, dense and waiting. A rustling came from within the room. Not footsteps, not movement I could name, just a soft bending of the space itself, echoing the songs. I exhaled slowly. The perfume of old paper and candles soot drifted through the cracks. The air was alive with secrets, breathing around me, unseen. The voices softened, pulling, circling. I could feel each syllable trace in my spine, brushing past my skin. I wanted to step back, but curiosity kept me frozen. A shadow moved behind the thin veil of the keyhole. It was fleeting, intangible, yet it made the hairs on my arms rise. I pressed my palm against the door, feeling the cold metal of the handle beneath my fingers. The vibrations of the singing pressed against my hand. It was a rhythm not mine, but I knew it anyway. The hallway seemed to stretch. Walls bowed and whispered, catching the echoes of voices and footsteps that were not there. Even the floorboards sighed beneath me, rustling softly. I could sense shapes inside the locked room. Not solid, not yet, but present. Watching, waiting, breathing with a life of their own. The singing shifted tone, drawing nearer, bending my name in slow arcs. I closed my eyes briefly, tasting iron and salt in the air. It was impossible to resist the pull of expectancy. A draft curled beneath the door. It carried hints of something warm, wet, almost alive. I could hear it rustle against the edges of the room, circling me. I leaned even closer, nose nearly touching the wood. The voices pulsed in harmony with my heartbeat, slow, deliberate, unrelenting. I felt a presence shift behind me, not moving, not breathing, but there, patient, waiting, connected to the door, to the singing, to me. The air vibrated faintly in my ears. I shivered, tasting both fear and a strange longing. The door did not open, but the voices continued, soft, twisting, impossible to ignore, filling the hallway with expectancy, dense as fog. I drew a breath, cold and damp. The keyhole glimmered, dark and alive. I stepped back, leaving the lock untouched. The room held its secrets, pulsing with song. I felt watched, counted, measured. The hallway returned to silence. But the memory of voices lingered, faint hums in my bones. The door remained closed, and somewhere inside, I knew the locked room would wait, patient, inevitable. Singing my name, the fog pressed against me, thick and damp. It smelled faintly of salt and cold stone. Each step I took sank slightly into the soft earth. I thought I was alone. The lighthouse far behind, swallowed by mist. The world had become gray and silent. Then footprints appeared. Behind me, perfectly spaced, but too fast, too light for a human. I didn't turn. I couldn't. A pull, subtle and urgent, kept my gaze forward. The fog seemed to bend around the shapes of the steps. Each imprint pressed a little deeper into ground, as if insisting I notice. I could feel their rhythm in the soles of my shoes. My breath puffed, warm and fleeting against the cold air. I could hear it, soft, shallow, measured against a rhythm I didn't set. The footprints moved closer, faster now, and yet silent, absorbing all other sounds. Shadows stretched in the mist, long, reaching, curling toward me. I felt a presence hovering, just beyond the veil of fog. I tried to step faster. The fog resisted, damp clinging to my ankles. The footprints kept pace, echoing each hesitant movement I made. A faint hum rose in the distance, or perhaps it came from beneath my feet. The rhythm matched the footprints, matched my quickening pulse. I could feel eyes on my back, not human eyes, watching, patient, insistent. I swallowed. The taste of salt and damp clay filled my mouth. The mist carried it deep, curling cold around my throat. The footprints shifted. They moved and aligned and scattered, then returned, circling closer, teasing me. The fog thickened. Shapes formed and dissolved within it. I could almost see them, pale outlines, bending toward me, then gone. I wanted to turn, to confront the rhythm behind me. My body trembled, but fear pinned my gaze forward. A soft rustling came from the fog. Not leaves, not wind. Something brushing, shifting, just beyond my sight. The footprints kept following. Closer now. I could feel them in my bones. Each inhale carried whispers. Not words I recognized. Only the repetition of my own name, stretched thin in the mist. I paused. The fog swallowed me whole. The footprints circled. A pattern I could not escape. I could hear the soft pressure of air, as if someone or something moved in perfect sync behind me. It was patient. I was not. My fingers brushed the damp walls of a cliffside path. Rough, cold, grounding. Yet the rhythm persisted, inside and out, echoing beneath my skin. I stepped forward slowly. The footprints mirrored, chasing, mocking. I could feel the space shrink around me, heavy with expectation. Then silence fell for a heartbeat. The footprints paused. The fog thickened. I inhaled sharply. The mist tasted of brine and old stone. A single shadow stretched long, then vanished. The rhythm returned. Subtle, insistent. I could not escape it. I continued forward, each step measured. The footprints traced, following, moving faster than fear itself. Yet I kept walking, carried by the tide of fog and dread. And somewhere beyond, I knew the watchers waited. Patient, inevitable, tracking each step I would take. The lighthouse tower shivered under a pale evening sky. Fog rolled in thick, smelling faintly of salt and rusted metal. Each breath I drew felt heavy, damp, filled with the chill of the stone walls. I climbed the spiral stairs slowly. The wooden steps groaned beneath my weight. Each echo bounced off the walls, swallowed almost immediately by the fog, creeping through the cracks. At the top, the lantern swung. A gentle motion at first. Then, harder, the light carved shapes across the walls. Shadows stretched, bent, and merged. I thought I saw a face, pale and still. Then two, then more. Time seemed to slow. The air thickened. It pressed against my chest, my throat, my temples. I reached for the railing. The wood was cold, slick with condensation. My fingertips trembled, tracing the grain as if searching for some sense of reality. The lantern swung faster now. Shadows flickered across the tower walls, twisting in ways that made my stomach lurch. Some faces stared, pale and silent, their eyes fixed on me. A hum filled the air. Low, almost imperceptible. But it vibrated through my chest, aligning with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I tried to breathe normally, but the air tasted metallic. Every inhalation dragged the shadows closer. The faces multiplied, layering over one another. They whispered in tones I could not hear. Voices folded into the rhythm of the swinging lantern. Each blink revealed a new shape. I stepped back. My foot hit the cold stone floor. The echo sounded hollow, wrong, as if answered by another set of footsteps. The lantern's motion slowed. A final swing. The shadows merged, no longer separate, no longer distinct. I could feel them around me, not behind me, not in front. Everywhere, the air grew heavier still. Time lost meaning. A single breath took a lifetime. I realized that I was not alone. The tower held more than silence. The watchers had waited. I could feel their gaze. Static in the air, a rustle at the edge of perception, soft movements, just beyond the pale light. I pressed my hands to the stone wall. The chill seeped into my skin. The heartbeat in my chest matched the pulse of the lantern's glow. I blinked, and the faces shifted, mouths open in silent pleas, or perhaps silent warnings. I could not tell. A single shadow separated from a mass. It hovered near the floor, stretching upward, watching. It moved with me, yet I could not see it fully. I took a cautious step backward. The stone was slick beneath my boots. The shadows bent, mimicking me, breathing with me. The lantern stopped swinging. Silence fell, but it was heavier than before. A static hum remained, vibrating in my ears, my bones, my chest. I could smell damp stone, salt, and something old, ancient, and waiting. The watchers held their patience, eternal. I dared to look around. Faces flickered at the corners of my vision. I could not distinguish one from another, yet they all observed. Soft footsteps or echoes of my own traced the floor. They matched just slightly out of sync, reminding me I was not alone. I exhaled, air thick with fear and anticipation. The tower seemed to breathe around me, walls expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the lantern's last swing. I did not move. I could not. The watchers had made themselves known, and as the lantern dimmed, its light leaving only shadows, I understood. I was part of their tower now, a silent presence among countless others, held in the swinging light and the weight of what could not be seen. Fog pressed against the lighthouse windows, thick, silent, curling around the stone walls like slow-moving water. I could feel its weight in the air, heavy, damp, and expectant. I stood in the lantern room. The pale light stretched across the walls, soft and hesitant. Shadows clung to corners, moving just beyond my vision. Every surface seemed to breathe. The metal railing under my hands was cold, slick with condensation. My fingertips traced the edges as if searching for something solid, something real. Eyes watched me. Every angle, every shadow felt aware, but none approached. None moved. The silence settled over me like fog. Thick, endless. It pressed against my chest, slow in my breath. I felt the weight of the tower around me. The spiral stairs beneath my feet hummed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. The walls seemed to pulse in time, old stone remembering long-forgotten footsteps. A rustle came from the corner. Soft, careful. I turned, but there was nothing. Yet I sensed presence. Patient, inevitable, always waiting. I stepped closer to the center of the room. The lantern's glow felt warmer now, intimate. Shadows leaned toward me, stretching, curling around the floor. Time lost meaning. Minutes, hours, or days. It was impossible to tell. The fog outside obscured the horizon, swallowing the sea and the sky. I breathed in slowly. The air smelled of salt, stone, and something ancient, like memories I had never lived. A static hum vibrated in my chest. Soft footsteps, or echoes of my own, followed. They were in rhythm with my heartbeat, just slightly out of step. I did not look, but I felt them tracing me, waiting. The walls shimmered under the lantern's light. Shadows folded and stretched, forming shapes that were almost human, almost familiar. I pressed my hands against the cold metal railing. The chill seeped into my skin, grounding me. I realized that I was part of the tower now, part of its rhythm, its watch, its patience. The fog thickened further. Outside, the world disappeared into white silence. Inside, the air vibrated with unseen breaths, countless eyes, infinite waiting. I closed my eyes. The shadows did not vanish. They leaned closer, accepting me. I exhaled, letting the heaviness settle. The lantern swung gently, a soft rhythm in the quiet. It illuminated nothing, yet revealed everything I needed to see. Alone, yet not alone. The presence had always been here. I let my body relax against the railing. The cold metal, the hum in the air, the fog pressing. Everything became one. The tower, the shadows, the light, the silence, they welcomed me. I felt my pulse align with the hum. Each beat a whisper of acceptance. Each exhale a surrender to the waiting. The fog pressed closer still. Soft, wet, alive. And I breathed with it, listening, feeling, understanding. The lantern light dimmed slightly, but never went out. Shadows softened, faces indistinct, yet aware. I could sense their patience, their endless observation. The silence deepened. Every movement, every breath, every heartbeat became significant. Time unraveled into the pale glow of the lantern. I did not move. I could not. The tower held me, cradled me, accepted me into its rhythm. Outside, the fog swirled and whispered. Inside, I stood, still, feeling the weight of all that had waited, all that had watched. And in that acceptance, in that quiet, infinite presence, I understood what it meant to be alone, and not alone at the same time. The lantern's light pulsed gently. The shadows breathed. The tower whispered. I stood with them. Finally, quietly, I was part of the light.